What happens when a student challenges the system? And what if that student is Barron Trump? In one of the most prestigious academic settings in the country, Dr. Rachel Johnson's advanced calculus class was known for two things: her genius-level mind when it came to mathematics, and her increasing focus on political issues, particularly social justice. Her lectures were as famous for their academic rigor as they were for her growing political agenda. It was a Wednesday morning when everything changed. But today was different. The whiteboard didn't display any equations, it read. Today's topic: redefining academic priorities. Students shifted in their seats, exchanging confused glances. Was this a calculus class or a political debate? Dr. Johnson didn't waste any time diving in. She began discussing the concept of privilege in STEM fields, suggesting that students, especially those from affluent backgrounds, were advancing not because of merit, but because of wealth and connections. It wasn't long before the focus of the lecture shifted away from math entirely. At the back of the room, sitting quietly, was Barron Trump. To the other students, he was a mystery. Barron wasn't like the rest of them. He kept to himself, always reserved, never drawing attention. Many of the students knew of him, but few knew him. They saw his last name and assumed he had been handed everything in life: connections, privileges, opportunities, but they didn't know the half of it. What they didn't know was that Barron wasn't just the son of a famous political figure. He was also a mathematical prodigy with an IQ of 170. As Dr. Johnson continued with her lecture, implying that students like Barron were the products of their privileged backgrounds, Barron remained silent, but his patience was running out. He calmly raised his hand, waiting to be acknowledged. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Dr. Johnson, smirking, called on him, expecting him to be defensive or perhaps even uncomfortable. But what she didn't expect was Barron's composed response. "I believe calculus is fundamental to both theoretical and applied sciences," Barron began, his voice calm and steady. "Shouldn't we focus on learning instead of redefining academic priorities?" His words hung in the air like a challenge. The students exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what was about to happen. Dr. Johnson was taken aback. It wasn't the response she had anticipated. She had expected defensiveness, perhaps even silence. But Barron's words cut through the tension in the room like a knife. His challenge to her focus on politics over education was clear. Dr. Johnson, not one to back down, decided to double down. "Well, Mr. Trump," she said, smirking, "maybe you of all people should understand how privilege shapes education. Not everyone had private tutors or went to elite prep schools." Barron didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded, acknowledging her point. "You're right. I was fortunate in my education," he said, "which is exactly why I believe in maintaining high academic standards so everyone, regardless of background, can reach their full potential." It was a moment of clarity. Barron was not just defending himself, but the integrity of education itself. Dr. Johnson, perhaps feeling cornered, decided to challenge Barron further. "Well then, if you're so committed to academic standards," she said, walking to the board, "let's see how you handle this." She wrote a complex, multivariable calculus problem far beyond the class syllabus. The class held its breath as Barron approached the board. Dr. Johnson had thrown down the gauntlet, expecting him to flounder, to struggle with a problem that few students could solve. But Barron? He didn't hesitate. With effortless precision, he picked up the marker and began solving the equation. The students were stunned. His hand moved across the board with lightning speed, writing complex solutions, referencing mathematical concepts, and explaining them clearly. It wasn't just that he solved the problem, he made the most complex concepts accessible, even to students who had been struggling with calculus. Phones were pulled out, recording the moment. But here's where things took an unexpected turn. As Barron finished the problem, explaining every step, Dr. Johnson's expression changed. She was no longer smiling. She wasn't amused. She was rattled. Barron had just put her in an impossible position. Her challenge had failed. But instead of gloating, Barron stood there, waiting. Dr. Johnson, realizing the control she had over the situation was slipping away, attempted to leave the room, but Barron wasn't finished. "Professor," he called, his voice steady but firm, You challenged me to a task. Walking out now would send the wrong message about academic integrity." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and the room fell into an eerie silence. Dr. Johnson paused, taken aback by his audacity, unsure how to respond. Before anyone could react, the door opened abruptly, and Dr. Richardson, a senior faculty member and a known ally of Dr. Johnson, walked in. He could sense the growing tension in the room. His gaze quickly shifted from Barron to Dr. Johnson, assessing the situation, trying to regain control, Dr. Richardson stepped forward with the intention of diffusing the drama, but Barron wasn't intimidated. With calm precision, he handed the professor the marker, his words cutting through the room. "Perhaps you'd like to give it a try, Professor. After all, as you said, family connections shouldn't influence outcomes. Only knowledge matters." The tension in the room was palpable, almost suffocating. Students sat frozen in their seats, the weight of the moment sinking in. The stakes had escalated, and everyone knew that this was no longer just about a math problem. It was about something far greater. Dr. Johnson stood frozen, staring at the equation she had hoped would humiliate Barron. But now, it was staring back at her like a challenge. She hesitated, unable to answer. The dean tried to intervene, but Barron had already made his point. Finally, Dr. Johnson picked up the marker, but Barron wasn't finished yet. "Professor," he said, "why don't we solve it together? Sometimes collaboration leads to a better understanding." The tension was unbearable. Dr. Johnson's pride wouldn't let her accept Barron's offer. She snapped, "This is ridiculous. A privileged student trying to undermine my authority." The dean stepped forward, trying to control the situation. But Barron, calm as ever, moved to the board and, in just 5 minutes, solved both methods of the equation. The class erupted in applause. It wasn't just about solving a math problem anymore. It was about integrity, truth, and standing up for what's right. Dr. Johnson, now visibly shaken, had no choice but to admit her mistake. "I've made a terrible mistake," she said. "In trying to fight perceived privilege, I became exactly what I claim to oppose. Someone who judges based on preconceptions rather than merit." Instead of crumbling, Dr. Johnson took a step back and acknowledged her error. Barron, true to his word, didn't tear her down. Instead, he offered to help her and the students, transforming the class into a place where merit truly mattered. The lessons were clear. True education isn't about power struggles or agendas. It's about learning, about collaboration, and about doing what's right. The class became legendary. Attendance tripled as students came not just to learn math, but to witness an extraordinary partnership between Barron and Dr. Johnson. They created a space where the pursuit of knowledge took center stage, and Barron continued to help his peers, offering tutoring sessions after class, bridging theory and application. So, what can we take away from this story? First, true education isn't about power struggles or politics. It's about the pursuit of knowledge. Second, it's about integrity and standing up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. And finally, it's about understanding that privilege isn't always what it seems. Barron Trump's quiet challenge not only changed the course of one lecture, but it changed the way we view education itself. It wasn't about who you are, but what you can do.
If you enjoyed the story and found it meaningful, don't forget to leave a like. It really helps us reach more people. We'd also love to hear from you. Share your thoughts and the lessons you've learned in the comments below. Your insights could inspire someone